Peace and blessings, world. Welcome to another Black Lenses podcast. If you appreciate what you learned here today, please remember to click the like and subscribe to become a member wherein you'll continue to receive knowledge and wisdom as it pertains to the 8 dimensions of wellness covered here at Black Lenses LLC Radio. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the 15 most common health concerns that seniors endure. Okay, or have to look out for and be vigilant. Be very, very vigilant. Let me just ask you a question. Do you want to age gracefully? And if you're 50 years old, and I've known people at 32 years old calling themselves old, when I remember I was only 30 at the time, and someone who was 2 years older than me was acting like they were like 65 or something. Man, they were only 32 years old, and they were. It's a long story, but sometimes your thoughts can have an impact on your physiological makeup. It can impact you metabolically, So it's very important not only to eat right, rest, exercise, but also to have a healthy mind state. And these are things that I've had to learn over my lifetime, and I've been here for over a half a century. So again, do you want to age gracefully? And just to go into like the 15 different complications that we endure, understand that a lot of this is not avoidable. So what I'm going to be talking about today is not only the issues, but perhaps ways you can alleviate pain. You can make this gradual transition from living a youthful life toward our final days a little less stressful. So number one, arthritis. Arthritis is the top one, okay? And a lot of people get arthritis because either they've used the joints a lot, they might have been athletes. Myself, I could talk about myself in particular. I did a lot of kicking coming up, a lot of jumping, a lot of different things through being a martial artist that have, I attribute to some of the pain that I get in my knees. Some other things that I've done as well that may involve weightlifting that have some effect on the joints and the cartilage within the joints of my shoulders. But arthritis is probably the number one condition that people 65 or over contend with. And it just comes with aging, I believe it was the CDC who estimates that at least 49.7% of elders go through some type of arthritis in their lifetime. People over 65 years old in particular. And the other thing is that, arthritis is not, even though like I just mentioned, 49.7 is the bigger number, but you do have that other 51.3% of people who may not experience arthritic pain is because it doesn't really, they didn't inherit it. I mean, because it could be genetic. I've been doing martial arts for a long time, and I tell you, rolls and a lot of falls and a lot of things that we've done to train our bodies and turn them into weapons. I used to have like back pain. I remember in my upper part of my spine, my neck, I was wondering why I had so much pain in my neck. So, when I went to the chiropractor and he took the x-ray and he showed me my joints, he showed me that between each vertebrae in my neck, the synovial disc were very thin. And I was like, wow, this is probably, I might have been in my early 30s or late 20s, early 30s. And I just remember that it was really thin. And I'm like, well, what's going on? My grandmother, she had a degenerative synovial disc issue that was through her genetics. And it appears that I have that, So that's just an example of how it could also be inherited. The other one, number 2, is heart disease. Speaking of my grandmother, my mother, my father, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who can relate to what I'm saying. They all have high blood pressure. So guess who else has high blood pressure? So it doesn't mean a death sentence. I mean, there are millions of people living with high blood pressure. It's just that you may have to cut back on certain things that may worsen it. you know. So, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of people. The CDC, heart disease remains the leading killer among African Americans and people in general, especially those 65 or over. But check this out: 489,722 deaths were in 2014 due to high blood pressure. Okay, it's 37% of men are affected by high blood pressure versus 26%, or compared to 26% of women who are dealing with it. High blood pressure, high cholesterol can contribute to that, can make it a lot worse. So people who have high blood pressure, and this means that the blood that's going through your arteries, the pressure that is on the arteries has been elevated, and it could be elevated because your arteries are hardening, and arteries harden because of the diet. A lot of us, in the diet that we have, it impacts the plaque that may build up in your arteries and cause your arteries not to expand like a rubber band. They should be expanding instead of just standing still. So, being very stiff, and they become stiff and hard, not only from diet, but from attitude. Remember before I mentioned that your mind can have an effect on you metabolically. And this is true. Check out the studies on how anger can alter the way that your circulatory system works, can alter the way that your heart functions, the way that you breathe. So it's important to have a strong and a steady and a calm mind, meditation, a lot of that, but make sure that you eat right, because even though when you get angry, and it could cause your arteries to harden over a period of time, and you develop plaque in your arteries from just these emotions. Now imagine compiling that with the cholesterol intake. Maybe you eat a lot of cheeses, or you eat a lot of oils, you eat a lot of fat. You love saturated fat. I'm telling you, saturated fat, just because it doesn't say cholesterol on it, like we know that eggs have cholesterol, but butter has a tremendous amount of saturated fat. And if you like to eat butter, and you put butter on your biscuits, maybe you like grits and you put butter in your grits, you put butter on your toast, you cook with butter when you put your bacon or whatever, and your bacon has cholesterol and all of this saturated fat, and you probably eat this, I don't know, some people love big breakfasts, some people eat them daily. But you figure if you are the type of person who likes cookies and cakes and pies and things of that sort, these things carry a lot of saturated fat. And this saturated fat becomes hard in your arteries, okay? And that could lead to high blood pressure and heart disease. It could make things worse. So if you're the type of person who has high blood pressure, it probably would be a wise decision to cut back on some of those saturated fats and processed foods and trans fats that you may be eating. It's probably a good idea to leave those things alone. Get into some type of exercise where you raise your heart rate up to 2 times its resting rate. Do it daily, so that that your arteries are constantly being exercised, and you're cutting back on the food that I just mentioned, and this will help with your high blood pressure. This will reduce it. There's also foods that you can eat. I'll go into that another time, but I'll briefly tell you that the saying, the darker the berry, the sweeter the juice, is true, because dark fruits the fruits that have the most melanin in them tend to have the most antioxidant properties. Research it, check it out. Number 3 is cancer. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who have had folks in their families, or know someone who has had cancer. And in my family, I've known of a few, and I attribute at least one of them to their diet. Here we go with the diet. I'm telling you, food is medicine. I have an interesting book I would like to share with you at the end of this podcast that you should all get and read it. I mean, it goes into how nature's pharmacy, basically, how you can find medicines on this planet that are edible, things that you can eat that really cure you. And you don't always have to go to a pharmacist. There are things that you have to do. It's a lifestyle change. There's things you have to do when it comes to eating and drinking that help you fight the potential of getting cancers and high blood pressure, as I mentioned before. But cancer, number 3, man. Let me just read to you a couple of things. Cancer is the second leading cause of death among young people, among people over the age of 65. I would like to think we're young at 65. I'm not quite 65 yet, but I guess that's all a state of mind. But your body does not lie, man. If you're the type of person taking in a lot of toxins and you haven't exercised most of your life, understand that this is a reality. This cancer that sets in. The other thing, too, about cancer is if you're the type of person who is constantly dealing with stress and you're a worrisome person and you don't cope with adversity very well, things like that, thoughts, your mindset can also trigger cancer. Look it up, research it. I've known someone, and I don't know if he's dead now or not. If he is, peace be upon him. His name was Umfundishi Masi, peace be upon him, peace be upon his son. I had the pleasure of training with both of them at a monk camp some years ago. And I remember Umfundishi, he guarded the Dalai Lama, the holy Dalai Lama, contrary to the whole thing about, his issue with the little boy. But the Dalai Lama is a respected man, okay? And I remember Umfundishi Masi, before he became Umfundishi Masi and changed his name, he was a Marine. And once a Marine, always a Marine, but he guarded the Dalai Lama. And I remember through his relationship with the Dalai Lama and the other monks who surrounded him, and through his practices with meditation, he himself was able to fight off tumors that he had on his head. This is real. I mean, it's so real. I think even in New York, I don't know if they have it anymore, but annually they used to have this event where people who were into meditation and Buddhism would sit in Times Square and they would all meditate in spite of all of the goings on. If anybody's been in Times Square, you know how it's bustling. It's a bustling area. There's a lot of people moving around and doing different things, but they meditate. In spite of all of that, they were still able to meditate, and they were doing it as a demonstration of how you could fight diseases like cancer through meditation. In fact, in hospitals, you have people who, young children in particular, not just young children, but you bring in dogs, or you bring in comedians, or you try to involve cancer patients in activities that bring them joy, because happiness and the euphoric energy that you may get from it, it changes. It raises the endorphin levels in your body, and it becomes sort of a way of curing you. Laughter is good medicine. You probably heard all of this before. But here's some other interest. There's 413,885 deaths in 2014 from cancer. A lot of people 65 years or older are living with cancer right now. Some people, like my wife, she'll go on a regular to get a mammogram to check it out, because breast cancer is something that is very prevalent among African American women and women in general. You're not always able to prevent cancer, but it's a good thing. Like with diet, fighting off high blood pressure, it's a good thing to have a peaceful state of mind, to eat foods that are less carcinogenous. So I give you one example. Broccoli is an excellent anti-carcinogen, okay? But red meat like beef is carcinogenous. Some people get upset when I mention these facts. You just got to look it up. As you're eating red meat. And I want you to think about it. Some people don't eat cows at all. They stay away from red meat. Some places in this world, the cow is revered. And I've been around folks, who practice the Santeria, or they may have been into the animal sacrifice, and you whisper certain things into an animal's ear and you cut its throat, and its animal spirit goes to heaven and delivers your message. Some people are into these, what we call pagan rituals and religions, but understand what the cow is going through. I mean, imagine if you were in a slaughterhouse and you're in there with maybe 1,000 other people just like yourself, look the same as you, from the same species. But you seeing them, on this conveyor belt, so to speak, or once they go into this certain house, they're getting their heads cut off. You're in there when their heads are being cut off. You see it. Imagine how much stress that would bring. Now, I don't know the exact number, but I know that a lot of cows who endure that type of stress and animals who see the knife develop this type of stress that curdles the blood, and that blood becomes toxic. And you eat that meat. I understand that blood vessels and even blood cells in our bodies carry nutrients that are good for the various muscle groups in our body. So if those blood cells have been contaminated with the essence of fear, and however that may affect it, may become carcinogenous, that makes the meat carcinogenous. So then you go and eat that meat, and perhaps this is why we find a lot of people who tend to eat a lot of red meat to be more prone to getting cancer. Check it out. It's just not me saying it is. These are based on stats that I've read. I don't have all the stats in front of me, but we're all wise people. Go check it out. Look it up. Okay. Another one, number four. Number four is respiratory disease. You know, I think I had a loved one, and peace be upon her. I remember her struggling with her breath. She was very old. She was 93. And I just remember how, peace be upon her. I mean, I could still see her in my mind. I remember her laboring to breathe, like she couldn't rest, get really good rest. I mean, she was breathing like this. Like, imagine breathing that fast, that hard, and struggling to get wind that much for hours upon hours, days after days, for 3 days. Just imagine 3 days breathing like, imagine doing that, because you really can't get all of the air into your lungs. A lot of elderly people tend to get what's it called? The word escapes me. Oh man, it's going to come to me. But these are a couple others. You have chronic lower respiratory disease, such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. I know people in my family who have that. It's the third most common cause of death among people 65 or over, with 124,693 deaths in 2014. And understand, stats are taken like every 10 years because the trends tend to change by that time period. You know, and maybe not that much, but 10 years is the mark, is where you do these samples. Also, according to the CDC, people 65 years or older, about 10% of men, 13% of women are living with asthma, including me. And, you know, I never had asthma my whole life. Then when I got to be, I don't know, maybe it was 49, my doctor said, you have asthma. You know, so every now and then, you know, and I have a post-nasal drip. It's like crazy, man. I try to do things naturally to cure it. So I cut back on dairy, and a lot of people don't understand that. Remember in my previous podcast, I talked about how dairy and the eating of cheeses and milk and like butter, I mentioned, is especially not good for African Americans, African people, Asian people, indigenous Americans. And I could give you the numbers. You got about 80% of those people in the African diaspora who are lactose intolerant. You got 90% of Asians who are lactose intolerant. I mean, he still leaves that 10% and the 20% who don't have these issues, but these numbers are real. Indigenous people, 80% are lactose intolerant. It doesn't tend to be prevalent with people who have Northern European heritage. But because I have asthma, it's important for me to not eat dairy, you know, so I stay away from milk. I don't drink cow's milk at all. Occasionally I cheat. I'll have some cheese. You know, I have cheese, something that I love to eat. I'm trying to wean myself away from it. I went and got me some Daya. I think it's an Indian vegan cheese now. I've been trying to wean myself away from American cheese, that yellow cheese, Italian cheeses, Parmesan and mozzarella, cheddar, and everybody probably listening like, cheese. Man, look, I'll be honest, I love cheese, man. I'm not like where I'm gonna have a cheese party like some of these Europeans do, and I have a dish going around, have some cheese. Not like that. More like I just like cheese on my pasta. I like it. I even make these meatballs out of ground turkey, and I use breadcrumbs, Italian breadcrumbs, and I may put some Parmesan cheese with it too. And it's delicious, man. So it's a challenge for me. That's one of the dairy things that I have a challenge. Actually, it's the only part of dairy that I have a challenge getting away from. Also, you have a lot of people living with chronic bronchitis. Uh, the numbers are still the same: 10% of men, 11% of women. That's a real close, right? In correlation. Emphysema. Um, what is it called, man? Oh, congestive heart failure. I knew it would come to me. A lot of elderly people 65 or older, who have heart issues. Once you develop that COPD or I just said it. Once you develop COPD or you develop congestive heart failure, a lot of people, they see that as a death sentence. Professionals will say you probably have about 5 to 6, 7 years left. But I've seen people in my own family who, at least one who had COPD, who lived a lot longer after being diagnosed with the disease. Another one, number 5, is Alzheimer's disease. So let me just read this to you. Alzheimer's disease accounted for 92,604 deaths of people over the age of 65 in 2014, according to the CDC. Alzheimer's disease, which is about 11%. Okay, so people 65 years or older, about 11% of the population has Alzheimer's disease. Says here, still experts acknowledge that cognitive impairment has a significant impact on senior health across the spectrum, from issues of safety and self-care to the cost of burden of care, either in home or at a residential facility. So this is something that we don't take into consideration. A lot of people out here are single. I don't know how many elderly. That would be an interesting statistic to look up. How many elderly people are actually living on their own and have been that way for many years? I think about family members of mine and people who are close to me who've never had children, and how it would be to age in a world like this, wherein disease starts to set in after the age of 55, 65 years old, and you don't have anyone to care for you. You have to pay for it. I mean, I think about the cost of not just time, effort, money, space, and how your life can impact others who may not, live with you. Maybe your need for other people when you become older, and we all do need other folks. We need people to help us. And if anyone has an elderly person in their family, you know how much assistance they may need. For me, I went out and I bought a home. I bought a bi-level home so that when my mother or whoever family member got old or needed me, that they could come in on one floor and not have to worry about climbing stairs and things of this sort. Not only that, if they became ill and needed me to care for them and needed to be rolled in the house for any particular reason, we wouldn't have to worry about going going up steps or having a ramp built. I wanted to make sure I bought a house that was easily accessible for a person who was elderly, not just the young folks. And I still consider myself to be a young person. I'm 54 years old right now. But I think about, my mother, who's 79, will be 79. My father is the same age. My sister, who's a few years older than me, if they need me, I think like of how I can cut down on their expenses when they become sick. Instead of relying on the hospital and hospice and other people to care for them, I want to be able to care for them myself. So I educate myself. And this is important, especially when you have a disease like Alzheimer's. You need people around you who love you, who are invested in you. I've seen family members and other folks that I've known be in these care facilities, and folks who are getting barely minimum wage are working there, and they don't put forth their best effort to take care of you. They may not answer when you ring the bell for them to come. I've seen a lot of ugly things in places where folks are responsible to care for those who are transitioning or maybe elderly, and it's not good. So for me, if you're anything like me and you really love your family, you will try to do whatever it is in your ability. And that includes educating yourself on how you can take care, not just yourself, but them if they need you to, without turning them towards some facility somewhere else to have strangers caring for them. Number 6, osteoporosis. Now, osteoporosis, and this is not racist, it's racial, and there's a difference. Okay. This is osteoporosis does not really affect people of the African diaspora. Remember, like lactose affects people of the African diaspora negatively. Well, and osteoporosis doesn't affect African or people of the African diaspora negatively. We don't get it. It's just not common. It's not common. Let me just say it's not common. You may have some African American people or African people in the diaspora who have some type of bone disease, but it's more prevalent among Europeans and Asian Americans, or Asians. I'm sorry, I should say Asians. Asians and Europeans, osteoporosis is more prevalent there. Now, osteoporosis can contribute to becoming less mobile and potentially disabled. Should you fall, you can easily fracture a bone. Vertebral bodies collapse. And remember, I was talking about my neck. So the synovial disc that are supposed to provide like a cushion when you walk, so that your spine kind of bounces on top of this and moves. It's able to turn left, right, or whatever without having discomfort where your bones are rubbing against each other. But when you have osteoporosis, your bones become very brittle. The synovial disc between your vertebrae become minimal. And because of the reduction in size, you feel a lot of pain. Americans over the age of 50 are affected by low bone mass and osteoporosis, putting them at risk for a fracture or break that could lead to poor senior health and reduced quality of life. And nobody wants to live their life being in pain. You know, I mean, when the older you get, you have doctors wanting to prescribe you pain medicine. You know, you might have a prescription for every single thing that you're dealing with. And look, I'm not saying that, you know, you shouldn't take medicines. I just think you should be careful. As I spoke on earlier, there is a pharmacy. It's a nature's pharmacy, and there are things that you can do naturally to help yourself, help alleviate pain, and help to deal with some of the ailments you may be developing as you reach your senior years. You know, taking medicine, it can affect your liver, you know, and in fact, it does. Taking a lot of prescription medicines impacts your liver. And so what you want to do is you want to explore these things while you're young. So if you're a young person listening to me right now, you want to try to implement some of the things I'm saying about elderly people and people who are suffering right now from some type of chronic disease or illness. You want to try to implement the diets now. You want to do the exercises now, so that when you become an elder, and hopefully you do, hopefully you live a long life. And if you live a long life, you age gracefully. Okay. Anyway, so what's more likely with osteoporosis that by the year 2020, scientists and experts predict that the numbers will rise to 64.4 million people diagnosed with osteoporosis. Now, remember, this is primarily European and Asians, okay? And it doesn't really affect people of the African diaspora and Africans, but it doesn't mean that you don't try to take on the same type of good habits we're requiring, or doctors require, folks who are more prone to becoming ill with osteoporosis. You should do the same type of diet and exercises as them. Everybody, this is universal. Okay. Number 7 is diabetes. The CDC estimates that 25% of people age 65 or older are living with diabetes. Okay. This is another thing when it comes to diet. I mean, there was 54,161 deaths among adults over 65 in 2014. Okay. Diabetes can be identified and addressed early with simple blood tests, blood sugar levels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Stay away from sugar as much as you can. If you're a historian like me, you know that when Europeans colonized the Western Hemisphere, sugar was one of the most sought after commodities. And they created all kinds of things with sugar, pies and cakes and pastries. It's very, very prevalent in European culture. And if you go back and maybe you study some of the early leaders of this country, and you look, like George Washington had no teeth. These men and women back in the day couldn't brush their teeth like we do today. But there were ways of taking care of your teeth. Africans would use the licorice stick. But the Europeans in this country, with their love of sugar, and even in England, their teeth were just rotting right out of their mouth. And this is before dentures were prevalent. George Washington, in fact, an interesting historical fact is that he had dentures, and some people think his dentures were made out of wood. Fact check. George Washington's dentures were made out of his slaves' teeth, who he would have knocked out and put into a wooden denture-like platform, and that's what he would put in his mouth. Imagine that. Okay, number 8, influenza and pneumonia. Okay, although the flu, pneumonia aren't chronic conditions, these infections aren't the top 8 of death because with people over 65 or older, according to the CDC. But seniors are more vulnerable to these diseases. Like I told you about the COPD, this tends to be something that comes around when you're like 60 years old. Maybe you were a smoker your whole life, and maybe you smoked a lot of things that cause the areola. Okay, so you have in your lungs, you have these sacs called areola, the areola sacs, right? And they hold air. Now, over a period of time, if you're abusing your lungs and you're smoking a lot of cigarettes and you're doing things like this, also understand that in your lungs, like in your nasal cavity, you have cilia. Like they're really small, fine hairs like that move things in and out of your lungs. But when you smoke, you stop that cilia from moving. So any type of plaque that may build up or tar that may build up from you smoking cigarettes will affect each one of your air sacs. Now, let me make sure I'm calling these air sacs right. I'm not sure. I think they're called alveoli. Air sacs and lungs. Okay. The tiny branches of air tubes in the lungs. Oh, they're called alveoli. I call them areola. I think areola is the brown area around the nipple on the breast. Men have one. It's a lot smaller than a woman's, but I said the wrong thing. My fault. It's alveoli. So you have these alveoli, but in those hair sacs, you also have these tiny hairs that are supposed to move things out of your lungs. But if you're a smoker, those hairs stop moving, the cilia stops moving, the tar sits in, and these alveoli sacs begin to become congested with tar, and this tar stops your lungs from expanding to its full capacity, and you're not able to get all of the oxygen that you need. I'm not too bad with my science. I'm not too bad. Not too bad. But anyway, influenza and pneumonia. Number 9 is falls, believe it or not. And, because our bone density decreases as we get older, it's important that you do exercise like weight-bearing exercises. It doesn't mean that you have to lift weights. What it means is while I'll use low-intensity, high-impact exercises like the elliptical, to get my heart rate up. It's like running without actually pounding on the ground. But when we get older, because our joints hurt and we want to try to alleviate that pain, so what we do is things like the elliptical. It doesn't do anything for our bone density. So see, what happens is the body responds to your exercise. So if you're doing jumping jacks, and you're up and down, and maybe you're jogging in place, you're I don't know, you're playing a sport. Maybe you play light tennis. You don't have to go hard like you did when you were 19 or 20 years old, but something where you're moving. You can move slow, but something where you're moving. Maybe if you just did an exercise. I do this exercise with my wife where we'll take a basketball, right? And we got a hoop out front, and we'll just keep trying to push the ball into the white box and score as many baskets as we can in 1 minute. She'll take a minute break, then I'll do it. And then we go back and forth. We do that like 10 times each. That type of jumping helps to strengthen your bones. I mean, because your body will respond to the activity. So the bones, the body just has an innate tendency to create more calcium when the bones are being used, and that comes from weight bearing exercises like jumping, okay, jumping jacks and things of that sort. But I've heard of people who fall and they can't get up. You may have heard the people. I mean, there used to be a commercial when I was a kid. It was like, I'm falling, I can't get up. And it was some type of way that you can call emergency crews to come to you. And this goes back to my thing about being alone. It's tougher on people who are alone. I had a friend whose mother passed away, and they hadn't him and his sibling hadn't spoken to the mother in a couple of days, but they didn't know. A couple of days away from your parent, who expects these things? And just to go visit her on the third day and find that she was laying deceased on the floor, peace be upon her. And she was laying deceased on the floor. Imagine the heartbreak. Imagine the pain from that. Imagine how much that hurts. We need people in our lives. And this is a little sidebar, man, but it's important. You got to reach out to the folks that you love and that love you. I'm not saying reach out to the toxic family, because we all have toxic family. And sometimes you may need to, in order to have peace of mind, you may need to love them from a distance. But, send them a card, send them some type of information. Let them know that you still think about them, that you love them. As much as possible, try to reconcile any differences that you have with family members and keep them close, man, because you may need them when you get older. Substance abuse is number 10. This one, I've heard of people, especially folks who I've known who are elders now, and I ask, man, how did you get COPD? How did you get sick? Like, what's wrong with your lungs? And being stupid, so maybe using drugs when they were younger. They abused them so much that now that they're older, the body just can't withstand the other changes that come with growing old. I mean, men tend to produce more estrogen as we get older, so our muscles get softer. So we can't afford to become idle and not use them, because once the muscles become weak, that means you don't exercise as much. That means you're not doing any type of weight bearing exercise. That means your bones become more brittle, and it's just you just constantly are what's the word, de-escalating in life. Once you reach the age of 35, it becomes a rapid decrease. So it becomes even more important that you adhere to certain exercises and stay away from drugs, man. Stay away from alcohol. I mean, I remember a conversation that I had with some young ladies when I was somewhere in my early 30s. And they were talking about the differences between smoking weed. One of my friends loved to smoke weed. I mean, he smoked a blunt, he smoked weed, like chain smoking, right? And the females that we were out with this time, they were drinkers. At least one of them was. And I remember her logic was that it's better to drink because you don't destroy brain cells. And it's like, I remember him going back and forth. What do you think is happening with you when you get intoxicated and you can't use your mind and you're not functioning correctly? Somehow your equilibrium is thrown off. You're destroying something too. Not only do you affect your blood cells, or you affect your brain cells, you affect blood cells and you affect the function of your liver. Understand, your liver is the filter for the body. So once the liver becomes diseased, maybe you develop cirrhosis of the liver or whatever the case is. You may see people where the whites of their eyes become more yellow. Once that happens to you, once you abuse your liver to the point where it doesn't function correctly, you're on the path toward your final days. So staying away from substance abuse, drinking, smoking, drugs, taking pills that affect the liver, as I mentioned before. Even some of these pharmaceutical drugs that your doctors give you, a prolonged time of taking these things for a prolonged period of time can have an adverse effects to your liver. Ask your doctor. Ask your doctor. Obesity. You don't want to be, man, this is, all of this stuff goes together, doesn't it? Listen, I mean, if you're heavy set and you understand that you're not doing weight bearing exercises and your bones are more brittle, now you on top of that, you're heavy, you have atrophy of the muscles because you're not exercising as much. And now you're sitting around and you're eating things that saturated fats. I mean, obesity kills. And, I know today, I see so many videos and images of people celebrating obesity. Oh, you're beautiful. I saw this woman, and this is not body shaming. I'm just saying, I saw this woman. It was an image of a woman. I think it was on Instagram, and she had to weigh at least 400 pounds, at least. And her knees were big. Like, you ever see an apple pie? Like each one of her knees was big and round like that. And her thighs were like the Michelin Man. I'm just trying to give you visual references because she was just really big. And to give you an understanding of what she looked like, the Michelin Man comes to mind. How big and round her knees were, as the pie comes to mind. How small her head was in comparison to her body. It looked like, like ice cream on top of a cone, soft ice cream, and people were making comments like, "You're beautiful. Oh, you're gorgeous. Oh my God, love emojis, hearts, and all of this stuff." And I'm like, that's going to kill her. I remember years ago, back, and I'm coming from old school. So back when Big Pun was at the top of the charts, Big Pun, the MC, peace be upon him. I remember seeing him when he first came out, and he was heavy set. I saw a picture of him when he was a little younger before he started rapping, and he wasn't as heavy. He was a thick guy, but he wasn't as heavy. But then it was sort of like when he dropped that Used to Crush a Lot, and that album, I Just Crush a Lot. When he dropped that album, some weeks after that, he really blew up, and I saw him on television. My wife and I were getting ready to leave out for something, and I saw him on the television. And the first words that came out my mouth, word is bond. The first words that came out my mouth was, "He's going to die." And I didn't mean that jokingly. It's just like, for you to get that big, that fast, and understanding what obesity is. If you really love someone, if you really care for them, you wouldn't make them feel good about a condition like that. I mean, you could tell them that they're beautiful, but don't tell them that being obese is beautiful. That's a different message. Depression is another killer. Check this out. According to the American Psychological Association, 15 to 20% of Americans over 65 years old have experienced depression. This is number 12. Depression. The CDC recommendations for exercise, and here we go to exercise again. So even myself, I can attest to this. When I used to box, and some of the martial art training required that we spar, and so I bought bags in my house to hit, and I know on days when I came home from teaching students, or maybe I dealt with something with professionals who I worked with, or whatever the situation, I find that exercise takes it right away. Whatever the stress I'm dealing with takes it away. Punching the bag, exercising, jumping jacks, riding the bike. Man, I ride the bike through the neighborhood, and I'm looking at the different people, and I'm seeing trees and animals. Sometimes just being outside, and just allowing to just sniffing first off, a quiet place outside, a place that has a lot of greenery, a lot of vegetation, animals. I'm not talking like, wild, like foxes and wild animals and jackals. I'm talking about like birds, where you can see the squirrels doing their thing, where you can see the bees buzzing in the air, where you could just be quiet and absorb life. And just for a second, just sit still, more than a second, sit and just feel how good it is to be alive, because stress can really bring you down, man. And I understand everybody's different, dealing with a different bag. You may have lost a mother. I've had students who witnessed their brothers being shot, who witnessed their father dead on the floor in the living room, who witnessed their mother be abused, who are living in impoverished conditions, and then they're required to come to school and perform, having not eaten last night, saw their mother get beat. Maybe they come back to school after a week of their father being shot and killed, and we're telling them to read a book. And this happens, it's more prevalent in the city. You find depression is more prevalent in the city because there's more people and there's more opportunities to run into circumstances that may not make you feel happy. Because everybody is challenging each other for an opportunity to make more money, for a chance to have an opportunity even. So depression, the way you fight it off is exercise, but that's number 12 on the list. Number 13 is oral health. And I know some people who are, they don't really brush their teeth. And I laugh, man. It's not really funny. But I've had students who are not educated when it comes to hygiene. And in the inner city schools, where, at least from my experience, it don't really teach health to students. So, and they're lucky if they get gym, in my experience. But I've had students, especially during that whole wear your mask era, where we're only breathing in our own carbon dioxide, which is a waste. But kids whose breath would stink through their mask, bad. Like, whoa, you want to help them. And it's like, that's bad. That means that's days of going without cleaning your mouth. You have this bacteria that sets into you and gets into your mouth, and that could lead to disease. In fact, one thing I've learned, and you can research this, is that disease starts in the stomach, in your gut. Excuse me. So what it says here is healthy teeth and gums are important, not just for a pretty smile and easy eating, but also for overall senior health. According to the CDC, 25% of adults over 65 have no natural teeth. And this is something I've seen. I don't know if it's maybe they're drinking less water. I've seen elders who used to have beautiful white teeth, and now they're in their 60s and or their 50s, but now in their 70s their teeth are green or yellow, really, really like discolored. I have a couple of close friends who don't have teeth in their mouth. And for me, my whole life, and as I mentioned before, I'm 54 right now, and my whole life I've only had two cavities. I have a filling somewhere, but you can see no steel in my mouth. I've had one cavity when I was a kid, and that tooth came out because it was a baby tooth. That's what we call it, our primary teeth. But then I got another one when I became an adult. Right now I have a filling in that one, and it's not one of those metal fillings. Those are supposedly not good for you either. So one cavity. I just believe in brushing my teeth and keeping my teeth straight. I mean, I've seen so many people lose their teeth. Only way I'm going to lose mine is if somebody punches them out my mouth. God willing. Number 14 is poverty. According to statistics in 2013, 45% of adults 65 and older had incomes below poverty level. And I can understand how that happens, because I went from making well over six figures and then retiring. And I'm not going to mention how much I'm making now, but it ain't much. So I went from being middle class to poor, just like that, So a lot of people take maybe their jobs and their careers for granted. And this world, in this country in particular, it forces you to work until you're old, and if you're a religious person, we're guaranteed 70 years if we live a good and fruitful life. But anything over 70 years or 70 is a blessing. So, and because most men live to be about 70 and most women live to be about 75, and I believe that number is going up a little bit now. If you work till 61, you only have 9 years of life left. That doesn't seem right. So you want to try to live your best life, but you got to prepare for life after retirement. And I can tell you right now, me starting my own business while I was in my last year of education and getting ready to retire, and I still have have all the certificates and the degrees and everything to get back into that if I wanted to. But for some people, they never got those degrees. They didn't get the certificates. They don't have the the permission or the keys to get into positions, professional positions that will be able to help them take care of their lives. Now, another thing is that, a lot of folks don't want to hire folks who are 65 years old, 55 even. You're old. They'd rather get a younger person who will require less money, maybe. They'd rather get a younger person who they know is going to be with them for the long haul. This is just the way of the world. So poverty, according to a 2015 Kaiser Family Foundation report, 45% of adults 65 or older are in poverty. And let me just tell you, there's a number of other things that contribute to this. We take things for granted, such liabilities such as taxes. People may need to get food stamps, out-of-pocket medical expenses, geographic variations, housing expenses, especially if your taxes go up. You're already paying maybe $2,100 on your mortgage, and the taxes go up in your city, and now you got to pay $2,500 on your mortgage. That extra $600, $500, $400 can hurt you. All right, so the last one is shingles. Shingles, remember, and I don't know much about shingles, so I'm going to read this one all the way out to you. Remember about that bout of chickenpox you had when you were a kid? It has come back as shingles. Didn't know this. When you're an adult, according to the National Institutes of Health, 1 out of 3 people over 60 will get shingles, and 50% of all Americans will experience it before they're 80. It usually affects only one side of your body, starting out with severe pain or tingling, and then developing into an itchy rash and possibly blisters. There is a vaccine available, so talk to your doctor about it. So I don't know much about shingles, and I didn't even know that that many people, 60 people over 60, 50% of all people over 60. I don't know if I have any family members who have that. If they do, they haven't disclosed that kind of information to me. But I really am not in a position to be able to talk about that one so much in detail. That's something you should definitely speak to your doctor about if you happen to have symptoms like the ones I just read. But let me just tell you, you see, run a comparison. I just gave you the 15 most common. The 15 most common. I'm stuttering here. The 15 most common health concerns or complications that seniors 65 or older may experience. But this right here is 7 common health concerns African Americans should know about. And you do the correlation, you compare. All right. So heart disease is at the top, high blood pressure, cancer, diabetes, stroke, peripheral artery disease, sickle cell disease. And the only thing that I could say about that is, why does sickle cell affect us? I mean, that's the only question I got. Why does sickle cell affect us, or African Americans, more so than other races? And people are dying from it. Let me see. Some of the stats here. Let's see. We got, while 1 in every 500 African Americans will contract sickle cell disease, the condition affects more than 90,000 Americans, according to the National Institutes of Health. Okay, more than 90,000. At least it's not in the millions. But the biggest one at the top again is high blood pressure. So hopefully you learned something today. Hopefully you learned that in order to thwart some of these complications that we tend to get when we're seniors, you got to do your exercise. You got to have a sound mind, body, and spirit. You have to surround yourself with positive people, people who make you feel good. You have to laugh. You have to stay away from foods that are heavy in saturated fats. You got to exercise, and you got to do weight-bearing exercises. You got to keep the people who you love and the people that love you close. You never know when you're going to need them. Life is not all about materials. There's a sentient aspect to being here that a lot of us don't tap into because we work so much. We've been conditioned to work. The average American spends 3/4 of their life working. We spend a generous part of our day working and very little time with the people that we love, very little time building and developing ourselves. It is very important to invest in you, invest in yourself, invest in the love of your family, reciprocate what is given to you in virtue, develop yourself spiritually. And as always, people, study, research. You don't have to take my word for it. I'm just one guy just reading some things that I've learned and sharing with you some of the wisdom that I've acquired over the years. I'm 54 years old. I feel pretty good. I exercise daily. Maybe, just maybe, that might be enough to convince some of you that it's never too late to get into it. It's never too late to exercise. As always, y'all, peace and blessings.